You've experienced this before, even if you never stop to think about it. You hug someone, and for a brief second, something feels different. Not in a dramatic way, nothing obvious, but there's a subtle shift in how that moment lands. Sometimes it feels quick and neutral, like a routine greeting. Other times, there's a pause, a slight stillness, something that makes the moment feel heavier than it should. And most men ignore it. They treat every hug the same. Just a gesture, nothing more. A quick formality before moving on to conversation. But that's exactly why they miss what's actually happening, because not all hugs feel the same. And more importantly, they don't happen the same way. Now think about it carefully. There are moments where the hug ends almost before it begins. There's no hesitation, no shift in energy, just a clean, quick interaction. Then there are moments where something slows down. The release doesn't happen immediately. There's a brief pause, a small delay, something that changes the feeling of that interaction. That difference matters, not because the hug itself is special, but because of what it reflects. Physical contact is one of the few moments where there's no distance left between two people, no space for overthinking, no time to adjust or perform. Whatever is felt in that moment shows up directly without explanation. And that's why those small differences stand out. Now, here's the part most men never consider. People don't consciously plan how a hug feels. They don't decide, I'm going to make this one different. It just happens. The body reacts based on comfort, awareness, and whatever is being felt internally at that exact moment. That's why some hugs feel structured while others feel relaxed. Some end quickly while others linger just slightly longer than expected. It's not random, it's a response. And once you start noticing that, everything changes, because instead of treating every moment the same, you begin to see the variation. You begin to recognize that something as simple as a hug can carry more information than words if you're paying attention to how it actually happens. Not what it looks like, but what it feels like. Now that you've started noticing that not every hug feels the same, the next question is simple. Why? Why does one moment feel neutral, while another feels slightly charged even when nothing obvious changed? The answer is in how the body processes interaction. Most people think connection is built through conversation, words, tone, what's being said. But the reality is, the body reacts before any of that fully registers, especially in close physical moments. A hug removes distance. And when distance disappears, there's no buffer left. No time to filter, no space to think your way through it. The reaction is immediate. It's felt, not analyzed. That's why those subtle differences exist. Now think about how people behave when there's no emotional weight in a moment. Everything is automatic. Movements are quick, casual, almost mechanical. There's no need to slow down, no reason for the body to adjust. But the moment something changes internally, even slightly, the body responds. Not in a dramatic way, just enough to shift the timing, the pressure, or the way the moment ends. That's what creates that feeling you noticed earlier. Now, here's where most men misunderstand what's happening. They assume that if something feels different, it must mean something big, either strong interest or clear rejection. They jump to extremes instead of understanding the middle. But most interactions live in that middle. That space where something is being processed but not yet defined. And the body reflects that. Sometimes it becomes slightly more controlled, sometimes it slows down. Sometimes it holds the moment just a fraction longer than expected. These aren't signals in the obvious sense, they're reactions. And reactions come from internal states that haven't been fully expressed yet. Now here's the key idea. A hug doesn't create emotion. It reveals it. It shows you what's already there in a way that words can't, because words can be shaped, adjusted, and controlled. But physical moments happen too quickly for that level of control. They reflect what's happening beneath the surface in real time. That's why you feel the difference before you understand it. Your mind tries to explain it after, but your body already picked it up. And once you understand that, you stop treating these moments as random and start seeing them as part of how people naturally respond to each other. Let's start with the kind of hug most people don't think twice about. It happens quickly. There's contact, maybe a light touch on the back, and then it's over. No pause, no shift, no sense of the moment extending beyond what's expected. It feels clean, simple, and almost automatic. And that's exactly what it is, a neutral interaction. Now, here's where most men misread it. They either ignore it completely or they try to force meaning into it. They think, maybe I missed something, or maybe she was just being shy, or maybe it could mean more. But the truth is much simpler. When a hug ends immediately without any variation in timing or pressure, it usually means there was no emotional shift in that moment. Nothing changed internally. There was no reason for the body to slow down, no reason to hold on, no reason to adjust. It was just a greeting. Now, understand this clearly. That doesn't mean something is wrong. It doesn't mean rejection. It simply means the interaction stayed at a surface level. And that's important because most men react incorrectly here. They either become discouraged, assuming there's no potential, or they try to compensate. They start overthinking, trying to create something that wasn't there, or forcing energy into the interaction that doesn't feel natural. And that creates imbalance. Because when you try to force depth into a moment that's neutral, it feels out of place. Now, here's what you should be paying attention to instead: consistency. If every interaction feels quick, structured, and ends without any variation, then you're looking at a pattern of surface-level connection. Not bad, just not developed. And that means your focus shouldn't be on the hug itself. It should be on everything that happens outside of it: the conversation, the presence, the comfort you create over time. Because physical moments don't suddenly change on their own. They reflect what's already been built. Now, here's something most men don't consider. Neutral moments are stable. They don't carry tension. They don't create uncertainty. And they don't require interpretation. They just exist. And that's why they feel easy. But easy doesn't always mean meaningful. So instead of trying to turn a quick moment into something more, recognize it for what it is: a baseline, a starting point. Because once you understand that, you stop reacting emotionally to neutral interactions and start focusing on what actually creates change over time. Now, let's look at the moment most men notice but don't fully understand. You go in for a hug. Everything starts normally, but when it should end, it doesn't immediately. There's a slight delay. Not long enough to be obvious. Not dramatic enough to stand out to everyone else, but enough for you to feel that something changed. The release isn't instant. There's a brief pause, a moment where neither of you pulls away right away. And that's where things become interesting. Because that pause is not random. It's a hesitation in ending the moment. Now, here's where most men misinterpret this. They assume it means something very specific. Either they jump to the conclusion that it must be attraction, or they get confused and ignore it completely because it doesn't fit into a clear category. But the truth sits in the middle. That pause usually means the moment carried more weight than expected, not necessarily something extreme, but enough for the body to register it. Think about it this way. When an interaction is purely neutral, it ends cleanly. There's no reason for the body to slow down. But when something shifts even slightly, the ending becomes less automatic. There's a brief moment of awareness, and awareness changes timing. Now, here's something important. That pause doesn't mean she's making a conscious decision like, I want this to last longer. It happens before that level of thinking. It's a response, not a plan. Her body simply doesn't rush to disengage. And that's the key detail. Now, what happens next matters even more. Does she pull away naturally after that pause? Does she maintain eye contact? Does the interaction continue smoothly? These follow-up moments tell you whether that pause was just a passing shift or something that carries forward. Now, here's where most men make a mistake. They react to the pause instead of staying steady within it. They either pull away too quickly because they feel unsure, or they hold on in a way that feels forced, trying to extend the moment beyond what feels natural. Both create imbalance because the moment itself was already telling you something. It didn't need to be controlled, it needed to be observed. So instead of trying to define it immediately, let it exist. Notice that the interaction didn't follow a predictable pattern. Notice that something slowed it down. And most importantly, stay grounded while it happens, because that's what allows you to understand it clearly without turning it into something it may not be. A pause is not a conclusion, it's just a shift. And shifts are where everything begins. At this point, you're no longer just noticing when the hug ends. Now, you need to pay attention to how it feels while it's happening, because this is where most of the real information is. Not in the duration, not in the label, but in the body itself. When you hug someone, there's a split second where your body registers something before your mind catches up. You don't think it through, you just feel it. The difference between tension and ease, between structure and relaxation, between distance and closeness. And that feeling is not random. It comes from how her body is responding in that moment. Let's break this down in a simple way. When someone feels completely neutral, their body doesn't engage much. The hug feels light, almost like a formality. There's no pressure, no shift in energy, nothing that makes the moment stand out. It's there and then it's gone. But when something is happening internally, the body behaves differently. Sometimes it becomes more structured. You might feel a slight firmness, a sense that her body is holding itself in place instead of fully relaxing, not pushing you away, but not completely letting go either. That's not rejection, that's control. Her body is managing something internally, holding structure while she processes the moment. Now, in other cases, it's the opposite. The body relaxes more than expected. There's a natural softness, a sense that she's not resisting the closeness. Her posture feels less guarded, less controlled, and more present in the interaction. That difference matters because relaxed presence doesn't happen when there's nothing being felt. It happens when there's comfort. Now, here's the mistake most men make here. They try to analyze too quickly. They label the moment instead of feeling it. But this isn't something you figure out through logic in real time. It's something you notice through awareness. Does it feel structured or relaxed? Does it feel quick or settled? Does it feel like a formality or like a moment? Those small differences tell you more than any category ever could. And once you start noticing them, you stop needing labels altogether because you're no longer trying to define the interaction. You're understanding how it feels, and that's where the real clarity is. At this point, you've started to notice timing and physical response. But there's another layer that most men never pay attention to. It's quieter, less obvious, but once you see it, you can't unsee it. Breathing and stillness. When a hug happens, there's a natural rhythm to the body. Movement, contact, and then release. But in certain moments, that rhythm changes. Things slow down just slightly, and for a brief second, there's stillness. That stillness is important because it doesn't happen when everything is neutral. Now, think about this carefully. When someone feels nothing, their body keeps moving. The hug happens quickly. The contact is light and the release is immediate. There's no pause, no moment where everything settles. But when something is being felt, the body reacts differently. Movement slows. There's a slight pause. And sometimes there's a moment where everything becomes still. Not frozen, not awkward, just still. That's where you need to pay attention because stillness means awareness. It means the moment registered enough for the body to stop rushing through it. Now, let's go deeper. Breathing changes as well. You might not notice it consciously at first, but it's there. When someone is relaxed and comfortable, their breathing slows down. It becomes steady, natural, and calm. But when there's tension or awareness, breathing can shift. It might become slightly more noticeable, slightly more controlled, or even briefly held for a moment. Again, not in a dramatic way, but enough to change how the moment feels. Now, here's where most men go wrong. They ignore these details because they're subtle. They look for something obvious instead, something they can clearly label. But the truth is, these small changes are more reliable than obvious signals because they're harder to fake and they happen before conscious control. Now, here's the key idea. Stillness and breathing are not things you analyze in real time. They're things you become aware of over time. You start to notice when a moment feels rushed versus when it feels grounded, when it passes quickly versus when it settles, even briefly. And that difference tells you whether the interaction stayed surface level or became something more. Now understand this clearly. This doesn't mean every slow breath or still moment has a specific meaning. What matters is the pattern. Does the interaction feel like it had weight? Did the moment pause even slightly before ending? Those are the things that tell you something changed. And once you start noticing that, you stop looking for obvious signs and start understanding subtle ones. Most men focus on the hug itself, but the real signal shows up the moment it ends. That transition from contact back to distance is where people reveal how they actually felt. Not through words, not through anything planned, but through how they re-enter the interaction. And this part is often more revealing than the hug itself. Let's slow it down. You separate, and for a split second, there's a reset. The body adjusts. The space returns. And now there's a choice whether to stay engaged or create distance. That choice is rarely conscious. It just happens. Now pay attention to what follows. Does she stay present? Is there eye contact even briefly? Does the interaction continue naturally without a drop in energy? Or does everything feel like it just closed? Because that difference matters. If the moment continues smoothly, if she remains engaged, if there's no sudden shift in energy, then whatever happened during the hug didn't disrupt the connection. It carried through. And that's important because it means the interaction didn't lose momentum. Now compare that to a different outcome. You separate and immediately the energy drops. Eye contact disappears. There's a small break in the flow, like the moment reset everything back to neutral or even lower. That's not something you need to overanalyze. It simply means the moment didn't build anything. And that's fine. Now, here's where most men make a mistake. They try to control what happens next. They force eye contact. They try to say something quickly to fill the space. They overcompensate for something that might not even be a problem. And in doing that, they disrupt the natural flow because the moment after the hug should not feel forced. It should feel like a continuation. Now, here's something subtle but important. Sometimes there's a slight hesitation before either of you fully step back into normal interaction. Not awkward, just a brief pause where neither of you rushes to move on. That's a sign of awareness. It means the moment registered. Again, not something to label immediately, just something to notice. Because when moments carry through like that, they leave a trace. Now here's the key idea. The hug is not the full interaction. It's a part of a sequence. And the outcome of that sequence is revealed after the contact ends. So instead of focusing only on what happens during the hug, start observing what happens right after, because that's where you see whether the moment created something or just passed. There are moments that end, and then there are moments that don't fully let go. This is where things become subtle because nothing obvious is happening. No dramatic gestures, no clear signals, nothing that immediately stands out, but something about the interaction feels like it hasn't completely moved on. You separate, but not fully. The distance returns, but the energy stays. And that's what most men fail to recognize because they're expecting something clear, something they can point to and say, that means this. But this doesn't work that way. It's not about what happens, it's about what doesn't end. Let's slow it down. After the hug, there's a moment where everything could return to normal. The conversation could continue like nothing happened. The interaction could reset completely. but instead, it doesn't feel like a reset. There's a slight hold in the air. Eye contact might stay just a fraction longer. Movement feels slower. Neither of you rushes to break the moment. That's what lingering looks like. Now, here's where most men make a mistake. They interrupt it. They feel the shift, but instead of letting it exist, they try to move past it quickly. They speak too soon, joke too soon, or physically create distance just to avoid that subtle tension. And in doing that, they remove what made the moment different because lingering is not something you create, it's something you allow. It happens when neither person rushes to close the interaction. And that lack of urgency is what gives the moment weight. Now, understand this clearly. Lingering doesn't mean something extreme is happening. It simply means the interaction didn't return to neutral immediately. Something carried over. That could be awareness, that could be curiosity, that could be a shift in how both of you are experiencing the moment. But whatever it is, it exists in that space between action and continuation. Now, here's the important part. You don't define it. You don't label it. You don't react to it. You stay present inside it. Because the moment you try to control it, you break it. The moment you rush it, you lose it. But when you stay grounded, when you allow that space to exist without forcing anything forward, you give it room to become clearer. And clarity always comes after the moment, not during it. So instead of focusing on what should happen next, focus on what's already happening. Notice when the interaction doesn't reset immediately. Notice when there's a pause that feels different. Notice when the moment lingers without effort, because that's where the shift actually is. Not in the action itself, but in what stays after it ends. By now, you can see that these moments are subtle. They're not loud. They're not obvious. They don't come with clear labels or instructions. They exist in small shifts in timing, in how the interaction feels, rather than what is clearly said or done. And this is exactly where most men make their biggest mistake. They don't stay with the moment. They react to it. The second something feels slightly different, they try to do something about it. They either rush forward trying to create more, or they pull back unsure of what just happened. In both cases, they interrupt what could have naturally developed. Now, think about this carefully. If a moment slows down slightly, if there's a pause, if there's even a hint of tension or awareness, that doesn't require action. It requires stability. But most men aren't comfortable with that. They feel the shift and immediately try to manage it. They start talking too much. They make unnecessary jokes. They try to fill the silence instead of letting it exist. And in doing that, they remove the very thing that made the moment different. Because moments like this don't grow through force. They grow through space. Now, here's something important. This isn't about doing nothing. It's about not overdoing. There's a difference. You're still present. You're still engaged, but you're not trying to control the direction of the interaction. You're allowing it to unfold. And that's what most men struggle with because they want certainty. They want to know exactly what something means and exactly what they should do next. But interactions don't work like that. They develop over time through sequences, not single actions. Now here's the deeper issue. When you react too quickly, you break your own consistency. One moment you're calm, the next you're rushed. One moment you're steady, the next you're trying to force something. That shift is felt immediately, and it changes the interaction more than the original moment ever did. So instead of focusing on what she's doing, you need to pay attention to how you're responding. Are you staying grounded? Are you letting the moment pass naturally? Or are you trying to control it before you even understand it? Because your reaction determines whether the moment continues or disappears. And most men lose it right there. Not because they missed the signal, non-stir, but because they didn't know how to stay still when it mattered most. At this point, everything comes down to one shift. You stop trying to decode every moment and you start experiencing it properly. Because the truth is, most men aren't confused because the signals are unclear. They're confused because they're trying to turn every small moment into a clear answer. They want certainty too quickly. They want to know, what does this mean before the interaction has even had time to develop? And that's what keeps them stuck. Now think about everything you've seen. A hug that ends quickly, a moment that slows down slightly, a shift in pressure, in timing, in presence. What happens after? What lingers? None of these things exist on their own. They are parts of a sequence, and sequences only make sense when you allow them to unfold. That's the key. You don't rush to define anything, you don't react to every change. You observe, you stay present, you let the interaction move from one moment to the next without trying to control it. Because the moment you try to control it, you break the natural flow. Now, here's something important. This doesn't mean you become passive, it means you become aware. There's a difference. Passive means you're disconnected. Aware means you're engaged, but not forcing. You're paying attention without interfering. You're allowing things to reveal themselves over time. And that's what gives you clarity. Because clarity doesn't come from analyzing one moment. It comes from seeing how multiple moments connect. Now think about how this changes your interactions. Instead of overthinking every detail, you become more relaxed. Instead of reacting impulsively, you stay consistent. Instead of chasing meaning, you allow it to show itself. And when you do that, something else happens. You become easier to be around. There's no pressure, no forced energy, no sense that you're trying to figure something out in real time. You're simply present, and that presence changes how people respond to you. Now, here's the final point. Not every moment leads somewhere. Not every interaction becomes something more. And that's okay, because your goal isn't to force outcomes. Your goal is to understand what's happening while staying in control of yourself. And when you can do that, you stop missing what's right in front of you. You stop creating confusion where there isn't any. And you start seeing things clearly without needing everything to be explained. So next time you find yourself in that moment, don't rush it. Don't label it. Don't try to control it. Just stay present long enough to understand it.